Okay, perfect. Hello, and a warm welcome to everybody who's joining us today at the Harvard Kennedy School and also online. My name is Antonia Leist, and I'm delighted to present to you what I've been working on as a team member of the German American Conference this year. So I think during the first 2 days of the conference, you were all able to witness many great panels on the German-American relationship with a more political and economical point of view. And I hope that today's reading adds a bit more to the personal perspective on the overall topic, because I think that friendship and personal understanding is essential whenever it comes to intercultural communication and building relations. And we're really thankful that we have those two great speakers here today, Goebel and Benedict, who agreed on giving a bit more insight on this topic in particular. And I think we can all very much look forward to all the insights they will provide within the next 1.5 hours on their work as authors and also on their year-long friendship. And with this, I would like to hand over to Joey Goebel. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonia. Listen, I gotta get this out of the way. Hey, Morgan. I am so excited to be here. I am so honored to be here where Legally Blonde was filmed. So I've been told we should introduce ourselves. So first, I would like to introduce Mr. Benedict Vels. Benedict was born in Munich in 1984, moved to Berlin after completing school and focused on his writing, earning a living with various jobs. His fourth novel, The End of Loneliness, spent more than a year and a half on the Spiegel bestseller list. It was awarded the 2016 European Union Prize for Literature, among other awards, and has been published in 38 languages. Recently, this was just like, I think last week, Ben, recently he won the German Youth Literature Prize for his novel, Hardman. Benedict currently lives in Zurich and Paris.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joey. And to introduce Joey, I would say Joey Goebel was born in Kentucky in 1980, largely unknown in his native United States, which is absolutely so unfair. I never will understand this. Goebel found an audience in Germany with his novel Torture the Artist, Vincent in German. Vincent received Austria's Jury of Young Readers Prize and was longlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize. Since Vincent, Diogenes Verlag of Zurich has published 4 more of his novels. The novels, which Goebel calls literary comedies, have been translated into 16 languages and have led to several book tours in Germany. Goebel lived with his son, Joe, in Kentucky. And I think there are a few more things to add here, is especially, no, we will come to that later. There's a lot more to add on this short summary.
Benedict's actually met Joe.
Yeah, Joe is that, for example, at edition number 1, Joe is the maybe most wonderful son or little young man you can imagine. It's insane. It's actually insane. It's like comes out from a movie or another species. The brightest kid I've ever seen in my life, probably.
Well, if he grows up to be half the man that you are, he's so sweet.
Oh, don't start with that. Don't start with that.
If you were here right now, the makeout session would a literary bromance for the ages, Ben. So that was very sweet of you. Thank you. And Joe says hi. Okay, so now what we're gonna do, children, I hope you enjoy being read to. I am going to read one of Benedict's works, and then vice versa. This is one of my favorites by Ben. It's a short story called 100,000. And I guess, Ben, you can just sit there and enjoy your own greatness while I'm reading this. Okay? Just bask in it. You ready?
Yeah.
No,
Okay,
no,
here we
no,
go.
but go ahead anyway.
100,000. Oh, I should mention who translated it. It's Charlotte Collins.
Which is an amazing translator. I really am blessed.
Here we go. Some people die without ever acknowledging that they are mortal. His father, for example, had spent his whole life repressing everything, from the cataclysm 30 years ago to his own advancing age and death. When the time came, he would walk out of the door entirely without fear, perhaps even cracking a joke. Daniel had always differed from him in this respect, and that essentially was the problem. He was standing outside the garage. They're about to go out. His father lived in a village near Zurich, high up in the mountains. There were hardly any neighbors here, just a few farms. His father had designed the modernist house on the hill himself, which was appropriate, as he'd always liked to live in his imagination. The morning sun spilled out across the valley, and Daniel gazed into the distance. As always, on his visits to Switzerland, he felt clumsy and heavy as if underwater. The past tugged at him, but this time, too, they hadn't discussed it. Yesterday had been his father's birthday party. There were already plans for this evening, and tomorrow Daniel would fly back to England. If he were to have one last chance, it was now on this drive. Daniel bent over the hood of the classic car, and an unprepossessing man in his late 30s with big melancholy eyes appeared in the polished surface. For a while, he stared at his metallic likeness. Hearing footsteps, he straightened up. Sylvie, his father's second wife, came over to the car and put a basket of sandwiches and fruit on the back seat. Provisions. She caught his expression. Are you all right? She asked, gently stroking his arm. It will all get better again. Daniel nodded. His girlfriend had recently left him. He was still feeling bruised, and he knew that Sylvie understood him. She always had. Just look at that. His father stepped out of the house, indicating the sun-drenched valley as enthusiastically as if he had just finished painting the view. The previous evening had taken its toll. He seemed tired, but otherwise on good form. Thick gray hair, skin tanned but smooth, rimless spectacles, a jacket over a snow-white shirt. Daniel thought about the birthday party, the countless guests, the swing band, the cook they'd had flown in, and his father, who had just turned 80, at the center of it all. He'd entertain friends and colleagues with good humor, as always, but this cheery, casual tone was also a thing he hid behind. His father could talk eloquently about art, politics, or simple gossip and make every listener feel he was speaking to them alone. And in fact, it was always the same blanket of trivial conversation rolled out for colleagues and son alike. They got into the classic car, a dark green 1961 Austin Healey. The dashboard gleamed in the sun. The beige leather seats were pleasantly soft. His father looked at him. Ready for that big moment? Daniel nodded and suppressed a sigh. The big moment was this ridiculous number that had haunted him since childhood. It had started on their first drive in the Austin Heat. It's done almost 40,000 kilometers, Danny, his father had said. Just imagine the day it clocks up 100,000. How old do you think? 100, Daniel had replied artlessly. He had been 9 at the time. Well, then we'd better drive it more often so we get to see it. He'd been going on about the 5 zeros constantly ever since, as if this were the only thing to aim for in life. To begin with, Daniel was there beside him as he kept track of every little change on the clock. But over the years, the gaps between numbers had become increasingly large, and his visits increasingly infrequent. It wasn't actually the constant chatter about the odometer reading that bothered him so much. It was what they didn't talk about. His father had simply never been able to do it. After the funeral, he'd sat around apathetically for a few weeks. Then a colleague had told him about the battered, rusty Austin. His father had understood almost nothing about cars, but he bought it and had painstakingly restored it with the help of a mechanic. All this was decades ago now, and the classic British car had long been almost a member of the family. His father turned the key, and the engine emitted a deep growl. Marvelous, he murmured, then pointed to the odometer. 99,912 kilometers. For some reason, he really seemed to believe that Daniel was interested. The autumn sun cast its amber light across the fields. There was hardly any traffic. His father unpacked today's set of conversational topics, which he would be sure to present to his guests again later in more or less the same form. Drama exhibition you wanted to see at the Kunsthaus, a sensitive scandal involving a town councilor that someone had tipped him off about at the party yesterday, and a fascinating book he was reading at the moment about the British monarchy. He spoke of Cromwell with such familiarity, it was as if the long dead politician might also drop in for a coffee. Daniel regarded the 80-year-old man at the wheel, whose childlike curiosity he secretly admired. For his birthday, he'd given him 2 tickets to a play in London. A nice gesture, but pointless. Daniel had been living in England for years now. Sylvie had flown over with her daughter several times, but his father hadn't even visited him once. His father was still chatting merrily away. They were driving down a steep slope into the valley when suddenly Daniel couldn't stand it any longer. You know what I was wondering at the party? He interrupted. What mom would have been like at 8. His father, who had been in a good mood just a moment before, looked at him in confusion. He opened his mouth like a carp, closed it again, and said nothing. Daniel waited a few more seconds, but no answer was forthcoming. It was as if he never asked the question. Haven't you ever wondered, he persisted, what mom would be like now? Sure, his father said finally, staring at the road. His usual chatty tone had disappeared. He seemed uncertain, cornered. Daniel couldn't help feeling sorry for the old man. He didn't know what to say. This was uncharted territory. His father's first wife had died young. He had spoken of her from time to time, of course, usually in loving anecdotes, but they had never really had a conversation about it. Keep going, thought Daniel. This could be your last opportunity. But he said nothing. Relieved, his father switched gear from neutral to his usual conversational routine. He talked about a trip to Brittany he and Sylvie had been planning for ages, and how he was thinking of retiring from architectural work. They could play backgammon in a cafe later, he suggested. He brought the board along. He seemed to have forgotten Daniel's earlier question. The odometer now read 99,957 kilometers. Daniel gave up. Just then the car slowed. It was a short night, his father said, yawning. Would you mind if we swapped places? That way I can close my eyes for a while and I'll be refreshed when the visitors arrive. Daniel stared at him in amazement. In all these years, his father had hardly ever allowed him behind the wheel of the Austin Healey. It wasn't like him to hand over to his son for the all important 5-0 drive. You sure? But his father was already pulling over to the side of the road. He got out, leaving the key in the ignition. Wake me up when the odometer is on 99,998 so we can watch it together. He seemed excited all of a sudden. We waited 30 years for this moment. They swapped places. Daniel slipped behind the wheel with some hesitation, but there was probably no deeper meaning to it all. His father was just tired. He started the engine, which gave a satisfying howl. It was true that the Austin Healey had always been fun to drive. There was a time as a child when he'd been fascinated by cars, and it felt good to be driving the classic car around the hairpin bends. He glanced sideways. His father had loosened his seatbelt and already nodded off. They wouldn't have any more time to talk now. 99,967 kilometers. He stared at the odometer. Why was the moment when the 5 nines turned into 5 zeros so important to his father? All through his life, he quickly moved on from even the biggest dramas or professional successes, but he'd always been obsessed with the mileage of this car. Why? How am I doing, Ben?
Good. Go on.
They seem to like it. Daniel changed into fourth gear and gazed down at Lake Zurich in the valley. Suddenly, there it was again, an image of himself as a child, returning to the house in Zumikon. The unexpected silence, his instinct leading him into the bedroom, seeing his mother lying on the floor in her own body. The pill bottle on the bedside table. The blue light outside brutally illuminating the room. The woman from the ambulance service who had taken him in her arms. His father, who had cried in front of him for the first time. He too had hugged him. They had almost never spoken of it. It was a fact that his mother had suffered from depression, but also that she had been unhappy at the sight of a man whose career had taken off and who was constantly working, implementing projects in Brazil and Japan, hardly ever around. For her part, she had stayed at home, cared for their child, and felt stifled. But was that a reason to take your own life? And could you take your own life and have loved your child nonetheless? 99,981 kilometers. In the months after the funeral, they had moved to the countryside, and shortly afterward, his father had bought the Austin Healey. At first, Daniel helped him with the restoration, but later he spent most of his time carving. Every day after school, he would sit until evening in the barn behind the house, carving one tiny wooden figure after another. They were supposed to look exactly like his mother. A few times he got close, but there was always something not quite right. It took him almost a year to make the perfect figure. It didn't just look like his mother, it felt like her too. When he had finished it, he wept. He picked up the wooden figurine, ran to his father in his office, and gave it to him. When he was working, his father always emanated a reptilian calm. He had glanced up briefly from his drawing board, but hadn't understood the value of this present. He'd been pleased but had never mentioned the wooden figure again. Not long after this, Daniel stopped woodcarving. Another bend, and Daniel turned off into the forest. It grew dark all of a sudden, but the sun kept blinking through the branches of the trees. They still got on well at first after his mother's death. Then his father had started to meet women, alien creatures who suddenly appeared at the breakfast table. He also went back to working on projects abroad. When he was home, he was usually either in the garage or on one of his endless drives in the Austin heat, as if he could only mourn properly behind the wheel. They had some long, intense conversations. It was true, just never the one that mattered. 99,993 kilometers. Daniel was a good student. He gained his school leaving certificate, studied business management, and went to work for a private bank. He traveled, had a few affairs, but was never really able to commit to any woman. In truth, he had simulated his relationships as artfully as his father did real conversation. Sometimes he would gaze out at Lake Zurich from his apartment window at night and imagine drowning himself in the black water. When he realized that he was serious about this, he abruptly resigned and flew to London. After a few weeks, he found a job with a British bank where he met Judith, who was German. They were both new there, both a little lost in London, and they clung to each other. He fell in love, or thought he did. They were together for 3 years. But just as his father had denied him the conversation he wanted, he had withheld his innermost feelings from Judith. It didn't much matter in the beginning, but soon the things unspoken weighed on their relationship like lead. If ever Judith asked about his mother, you would answer in monosyllables. He didn't know anything either. If she'd really understood him, they would have made it. As it was, though, the separation didn't come as a surprise. By the end, all they did was argue. And now he was 39 years old and virtually none the wiser than he'd been at 15 or 27. To be honest, he could have done with a Sylvie too, or some really good therapy. Right from the start, everything could have been. Daniel cast a glance at the odometer and jumped in shock. 100,001 kilometers. His heart felt as if it had stopped. Please, no. He, he looked in panic at his father, who was now fast asleep with his mouth open, snoring gently, head leant against the window. The final digit slipped downward. 100,002 kilometers. Shit, whispered Daniel. Shit, shit, shit. He immediately stopped the car, mind racing. Hadn't he seen somewhere that you could turn back the odometer by reversing? What movie is that, y'all? No? He has to reference 80s movies. Yes, that's how the boy did it in that film. Ferris something in a Ferrari. Daniel looked around. The road behind them was clear. He put the car in reverse and drove backward. The first few meters were fine. The stretch was completely straight. But then came a series of curves, and his dozing father suddenly emitted a loud snort. False alarm, he was still asleep. 100,002 kilometers. Why wasn't anything happening? Perhaps he was driving too slowly. Daniel decided that when he got to the next bit of straight road, he would really put his foot down. He took the bend, still driving slowly and carefully, and there was a loud bang. Daniel was pressed back into his seat. His father's head cracked against the window. What are you doing? Confused, his father clutched at his temple. Blood blossomed on his fingertips. It was only then that Daniel realized he had collided with a tractor that was coming around the bend. The farmer driving it appeared unhurt. After a few shocked seconds, he jumped down into the road furious. You have shit for brains or what? He bellowed at Daniel. Then he saw Daniel's father in the passenger seat and seemed to recognize him. Daniel breathed a sigh of relief. His father had always got on well with the neighbors, and he certainly had the gift of the gab. He had soon managed to persuade the farmer that he didn't want to call the police after all, but would settle the matter informally. In other words, 500 Swiss francs, because although the Austin Healey had sustained considerable damage, the tractor was only dented. When they finally got rid of the farmer and climbed back into the car, his father sighed, it's going to take forever to iron out the damage to the tail. You really need to tell me why you. And then he saw the numbers on the clock. They sat in the car arguing. His father simply couldn't understand how anyone could fail at such a simple task, keeping an eye on 5 numbers. Didn't Daniel know how important this had always been to him? Daniel responded with stammered apologies, but after a while he grew angry with his mother, where all this crap had begun, with his father, who developed this crazy obsession with the 5 zeros, with life that had thrust him into this absurd drama, complete with a cursing farmer. You know what? He opened the glove compartment, which, as always, contained old maps and a pipe, although his father had allegedly stopped smoking. He slammed it shut again. I'm not sorry at all. In fact, I probably even wanted it to happen. I've never been able to talk to you, and now you've missed your stupid 5 zeros. We're quits. His father stared at him in astonishment. What do you mean you've never been able to talk to me? We've had lots of conversations. Oh, for Christ's sake. You know exactly what I mean. We've never talked properly about mom, not even once. Why she did it, whether she loved us, why she didn't even leave us a letter. You bottled it all up, suppressed it. You just went to your congresses and symposia and built houses for people in Sydney and Singapore, but you were never there. It was as if her death meant nothing to you. Do you actually have any idea how bloody lonely I was in the midst of all your visitors and parties and projects? His eyes misted over. And if we ever did talk, you still weren't really there. The only things you were interested in were your car and this bullshit with the 5 zeros. Daniel glared at him. I'd really like to know what made you come up with that back then. What flash of idiocy prompted you to fixate on this crap? He looked at his father, who appeared visibly shaken by these accusations. He touched the lump on his temple and seemed to consider for a moment. Then he said, but Danny, the 5 zeros thing was your idea. For a while, neither of them spoke. Daniel skimmed frantically through his old memories, and suddenly he realized it was true. Not because he remembered, but because he felt it. When it happened, I hardly knew you. His father patted the lump again. You're absolutely right. I was away far too often. I wasn't there for you. I regret that. And it was a mistake never to have said so, too, because it's meant we've grown apart, hasn't it? I'm sorry, he said quietly. Daniel nodded involuntarily. He ran his fingers over the window winder. When your mother took her own life, you were 9 years old. And maybe you were a bit reserved with me because I was a stranger to you. You were always with mom. The only thing I really knew about you was that you were interested in cars, which were completely alien to me at the time, but I bought the clapped out old Austin Healey anyway. I thought if we restored it together, it might bring us closer. His father was breathing heavily. All of a sudden, he was showing his age. He raised his hand and placed it on his son's cheek. Daniel lowered his head. To his surprise, tears sprang to his eyes. Not now, he thought angrily, but they kept on coming. He pressed his lips together. I remember it as if it were yesterday, he heard his father say. The first time we took it for a spin, we talked about the odometer, which was almost on 40,000, almost once around the world. That really made an impression on you, age 9. And then we talked about what it would be like when the car had done 100,000 kilometers and how old we would be. 100, you said. And then you said something that could only come from a child. Dad, when the car's got 100,000 kilometers on the clock, we won't be sad about mom anymore, will we? I thought you remembered. I thought you couldn't forget a thing like that. His father glanced sideways at him, but Daniel didn't speak. When they got back and Sylvie saw the damaged car, they didn't tell her what had really happened. Instead, they turned the accident into a funny anecdote and chatted to the guests who arrived shortly after, as if nothing had happened. Next morning, when Daniel flew home, he and his father gave each other a long hug goodbye. Over the following weeks, he hoped his father would come and visit him in London. Daniel imagined them picking up where their last conversation had left off, opening up to one another at last, and his father kept promising he would make the London trip, but he never came. Early in the new year, Daniel fell in love. An English woman from Bristol. Her name was Nora, and like him, she'd been through a difficult time. Her previous boyfriend had left her for his childhood sweetheart overnight without warning. Daniel sensed it could get serious with Nora, that he would be able to tell her things he'd always kept to himself. She was familiar with his wounds. Sometimes he wrote to his father, who, contrary to plan, was still working as an architect. The mails were cheery but inconsequential. At first, Daniel was sad that nothing had changed, but he'd seen enough of life by now for it not to surprise him. In the end, he more or less stopped thinking about it. When Sylvie called him early one morning, he immediately guessed what had happened. The funeral was held in Zurich. Daniel went with his girlfriend. It was a simple service. His father had chosen the music himself. Lots of people came and exchanged anecdotes, but there were no profound conversations. And it was more as if his father had gone out for a stroll and might walk in the door at any moment. Only Sylvie wept throughout, and her short, very personal speech cut deep. Daniel didn't make the speech. When the will was read out, he discovered that he and Sylvie would each inherit 50%. The house and all the other assets were to be divided in this manner. The will was drawn up several years ago, the notary informed him. Only the last point is new. Your father had it changed just a few weeks ago. He read out, furthermore, I bequeath to my son something that has accompanied me all my life and which I would now like to return to him. I do this with much gratitude and the heartfelt regret and love of a man who was not always capable of being as he would have liked to be. The notary reached into a drawer and took out a small white cloth bag. Daniel took it without opening it and put it in his bag without comment. Only when he was back in London and Nora was off meeting a friend did he take it out again. He'd known what it was, but had wanted to be alone with it. He was surprised to find that his hands were shaking. Later, when his girlfriend came home, she found him sitting on the bed in floods of tears. She put her arms around him without hesitation and stroked the nape of his neck with her fingers. What did he give you? She asked. Daniel took the wooden figurine from the little bag and set it on the bedside table. Forgiveness, he
Thank you, Joey. It was like it felt like Wes Anderson was reading the story. You had such a thanks. Touched me really the way you were reading it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for writing it. And I'm just in awe of you. And I chose it because it's typical Benedict Wells in that it has lots of heart, but also humor. With his writing, even if I didn't know the man, with his writing, I can sense behind the words is a good, decent man. And I'm happy. This is
Thank you.
embarrassing him. I'm happy that I can confirm this. I've known him since 2009. So the writing has great heart, but there's the humor. This the driving backwards. That was just so great. And of course, you got your Ferris Bueller allusion in there. And furthermore, it's typical Benedict because it is literary. I mean, the thing is dripping with symbolism and subtext, but there's no pretentiousness. It's literary, but it's still accessible. It actually had an ending, a literary short story that has a proper ending that doesn't what's he talking about, you know? So I just love this story, Benedict. And one last thing, I love that the story explores one of our favorite subjects, the idea of troubled families.
Thank you. The question is what do we do now? Shall I read now immediately yours, or shall we have a little chit chat? Or
We could talk a little bit, I guess.
yeah, because the thing is, like, the funny thing with Joey is that we have many strong similarities, especially when it comes to writing. But in the same time, we couldn't be more different in a few other things. For example, he's somebody that really prepares. I managed to get from my whole life to be like half prepared, always coming a bit late in, always like even on my own readings, it sometimes is like I'm stumbled into my own readings, like what, now I'm on the stage, okay, I go on. And Joe is like, he already made his homework like 5 weeks ago. He already came up with ideas for this panel and everything. And I was like, and I'm more like 5 minutes before starting to work on that. So actually now two different forces are clashing, the preparation and the not preparation.
Yeah, you're actually supposed to be on the Harvard campus right now. So
Yeah, that would be
I think
nice.
you missed his flight.
No, it is yeah, no, I would love to be there because I just I'm so afraid of flying that the 2 times I was in the US, I came by ship. And I even was in Harvard. I told that story to Joey, 2008. And I was like, wow, my God, Harvard. And I want to see the library. And I was going towards the library and I, can I go in? No. Okay. But that was my Harvard experience. And I was a coffee shop, drinking coffee and seeing all the students. Oh, yeah, here they are. And so on. Yeah.
Look, I want to, before we get to my story, I want to publicly acknowledge something about Benedict. Let's talk a little bit about our careers. We have up to a point, we had parallel careers. We got our publishing careers started early in life, early 20s. The writing itself has a lot of similarities. This mixture of sadness and humor, and but at a certain point, our careers did diverge because Benedict had this massive bestseller. You all know The End of Loneliness. Okay, wonderful book. Still waiting for my bestseller to. We're still waiting on that. But what he's done since his bestseller, pretty much every interview or podcast or talk show the man does, at some point he works in Joey Goebel. He's like, well, I appreciate that, but you should really read Joey Goebel. And it's as though he uses his public appearances to be my agent, my PR guy. It's so sweet of you. So thank you for that. Thank you so much. But you can stop now. You've done enough.
No, because I feel like we all know the heartbreaking stories of, let's say, Fitzgerald's late novels that weren't successful. We know the even more heartbreaking story of John Kennedy Toole, The Confederacy of Dunces. We know all these stories when or even Stoner by John Williams, when the fabulous writing of somebody wasn't acknowledged as it should have been. And with Joey, I always read his books and I cannot believe it. For example, it's true, we had the similar start also in the way we were writing. We were more biting and more sarcastic in the beginning. And then with later on, we opened up to show our true feelings. We didn't have to hide behind it or whatever. And so what is The End of Loneliness for me is maybe, I know it's going to happen for you someday, by Joey. Because I can see the same handwriting of feelings. And the only difference between these two books is that I had the luck. I also have to say that I had the luck of the spotlight of some people who were making, something for a TV show and presenting the book or stuff like this. I had luck at that point, and Joey didn't have that luck. In fact, his book, his masterpiece, in my point of view, wasn't even published in the US. That is so unfair. This book is has the same quality of Winesburg, Ohio by Sherwood Anderson, the same quality of The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers, and it's not even published in America. It's only published in Germany, for example, and then the German readers say, yeah, that's beautiful how he describes the loneliness of this American small town. But why on earth is there no American publisher to do that job? And if you guys are here, and if somebody of you knows somebody from a publishing house, or if you will become, you have to go through that, you can close your ears over here. Or if somebody of you listening right now will become a person with power in the literature market, please publish that book, publish it. And at the same time, even his last book, I Against Osborne, just to have, it's different. It's a less it's more on the sarcastic side again because it was previous. But it's about a boy that comes back from a horrible spring break where his father died and everything, and he finds out some things about the girl he's in love with and all other things, and it's all on one day at high school. And each page is more or less 1 minute, and you have you could easily make 8 Netflix episodes. Each episode is 1 hour of that school day, and everything is negotiated on that day. Everything, and it is sharp and witty and touching and everything. This is also only published in Germany. So yeah, you German readers, you get an American high school book, but it should be published in America, and it doesn't make any sense. And I can't tolerate this injustice when it comes to Joey. And Joey's there are obviously, it happens again and again, but in this case I know the writer, and I can't believe that it is so injustice that is not even published. What the story that doesn't make any sense. And this is why I as long as the people listen to me, I won't shut up to say that, because it is not fair.
know any American publishers. That is so sweet of you. Thank you so much. And I have this very unusual publishing career, in which I'm out of print in my own country. The Germans have kept my career going across the ocean, and so that's why it's such a privilege and honor to be at an event in my own country here at the German American Conference, a rare instance to receive a little bit of attention in my United States. So thank
No,
you again, Benedict.
you are where you belong, and this is the only time that your American career makes sense, sending you to Harvard. The rest doesn't make sense. Because the thing is, one addition, the thing is, Joey is also such a sharp, important voice that is not heard. Everybody was, for example, we read like J.D. Vance, Hillbilly Elegy. Yeah. Joey's voice is even sharper and more interesting. And he lives in Kentucky, and he is surrounded by, for example, Trump voters and everything. And nobody ever had the idea to ask this person, because he should be like a powerful, interesting voice, a liberal voice, surrounded by conservatives in Kentucky. He should be like a voice that we listen to, that could explain a lot. And we all were like consulting the voices from the coasts and everything, or from J.D. Vance, who I think even became now a Trump supporter or whatever. But we should have listened to Joey. And so in the same time, he was not seen as the beautiful writer he is, but he was also not seen as the very important and interesting voice he could be. And he should be like something like a star or whatever, and whatever. And he could deliver that. And he wrote a book, for example, called Heartland. And it was very prophetic. It was about family and society, but also like a political, and it was with a main character that could be considered as a Trump voter 10 years later. And he wrote that 2008 or whatever. And he was always there and in the zone. And this is why I think this is why you belong to Harvard, and this is why the people should listen to you, because you have something to tell. And you're not talking about people you don't know. You talk about people you know. Yeah. So sorry for that last edition, but I hope you survived it somehow.
I just want to crawl through this screen and hug you right now. Thank you.
I see there's a question. What connects you both the most? How did you meet?
I think it was in Zurich in 2009. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
I was doing a reading tour over there, probably in support of Heartland.
Yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you took a train to my reading. And
yeah, because I heard the first time I heard of Joey, and this is also weird because now we turn once again around. I was 20. I was after high school. I started to write, and I for 4 years or whatever only got rejected by everything, by open mix or publishers or agencies or whatever, and it never seemed possible that I once will publish a book. And in that time, and obviously you're full of doubts of yourself, and you think you're a failure or whatever. And in one of these times, I read an article about Joey's book, Torture the Artist. And I read about, because Diogenes was my favorite publishing house because of the wonderful Carson McCullers. She's one of my favorite authors, but also because of John Irving, who made me somehow become a writer, Ian McEwan, and so on, Fitzgerald. So this was my favorite publishing house. And then I read an article about this young American author that was now in my favorite publishing house with his book, Torture the Artist. And I read how everybody at Diogenes was welcoming Joey. And I was like, it was like Oliver Twist, I was like standing at the window, seeing the family inside eating like a nice piece of cake or whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, well, one day maybe, and so on. And then 2 years later, I somehow miracle-wise was also at Diogenes, and I was always looking up to Joey because he's 4 years older than me. So I was always like, oh, what is he writing next, and so on. And then when I heard that he's on the reading, I had to go there, and yeah. So this is I think how we met.
I have a question. When you started writing the first, oh, sorry. Hi. When you started writing your first book, like serious, not like I write something and little story. How did you do it to really like sit down and be like I will write a whole book, you know? How did you manage to get the motivation and stuff?
The thing is, I was not an academic person. I think, yeah, that was not in my cards, even in high school. But what I had was passion and will, because I never considered myself, and still don't do that, as a talent. Even in my class, there were people that seemed so much more talented than me, especially when it came to literature and everything. But what I had was this passion to tell stories. And what I didn't see coming was how much the characters drag you in periods of where you're full of doubts and everything. How much, obviously, because I started to write a book, and I in the beginning I thought, oh my God, this will be amazing, and then I realized actually it's a horrible piece of whatever, because I gave it to somebody and I got a harsh critique on, and I saw it myself. And then I kept on writing the next book, and I thought this one will be it. And then again, I was writing a miserable piece of work. And obviously, it's hard to learn that. It's like you to write a book is like you want to tell a story in a language you don't know, like let's say Portuguese, and you have so much to say, but all you can say is like "Hola, mi amo," whatever, and you have to learn that language, and it takes you 1 or 2 years. And this is why many people stop to write, because they somehow have the idea, like I had, it should be easy and fun. It's not easy and it's not fun. At least in my case, first draft is never fun. It's horrible because you have this in your head, it's colorful and light and wordless, and all the emotions are where they should be, and then you have to translate it black on white and with words and everything, and this is a frustration because you will miss yourself, you will miss the story you want to tell, and over the years you learn this language, and then you can talk fluently in your own fantasy, but each book has another language, so it's I thought it's me because it was so frustrating. No, it is the process. It is hard to write. It is normal to fail. The question, failing in writing is not failing a draft. Failing in writing is giving up. That's the difference. And the only thing I could bring in was my will and my endurance, because this is the things. These were the things I could control. The rest I couldn't control. I couldn't control my talent. I couldn't control how many drafts I need. I only could control that I will still be there and not give up. And and I was so determined to do that because I was one of these late bloomers in high school that were kind of under the radar. Nobody expects something, and I had a troubled childhood, and I was full of anger and also love, and both were my inks to go on. And yeah, and then I realized after a while, giving yourself a chance as a writer doesn't mean you give yourself 2 months. It means you give yourself 2 years or more. After 2 months, I would have, if I would have said no, go back to university, I would never ever have written a book anymore, because I was so bad in the beginning. But after 2 years, you realize, okay, I make progress, I get better, I come closer, still not there, but I'm on my way. And thank God I had the time, and thank God, for example, I was finding these jobs, and Berlin was very cheap back then. But yeah, I needed the time. Others probably don't need the time. Others maybe start directly with a promising first draft. I didn't. So what I loved and what dragged me through all of this was the characters. I wanted to see the story when it's finished. I could tell the story is not there. I could tell the characters are not there, but then I discovered something new about one of the characters, and oh my God, that could be interesting. And now I see it in a different perspective, and that all helped me. How was it with you, for you, Joey? How were your beginnings actually?
Well, so I started out with this harebrained scheme that I would become a screenwriter. Um, my first love was film, and I started in on that probably around the time I was 17. Um, and so I wrote 6 or 7 really bad screenplays before I wrote my first really bad novel. They were. I loved Adam Sandler, and they were like cheap imitations of Adam Sandler movies, if you can imagine that. And agents weren't interested in that. And so I was an English major at University, Brescia University in Kentucky. And I fell in love with literary fiction. And what I did, I took one of those screenplays, The Anomalies. I kind of worked backwards. I took the script and adapted it into a novel. And apparently I'm a novelist now. But I'm with you, Ben. Writing does not come easily to me. Strangely, it's counterintuitive. One would think the more that you write, the better you get at it, the easier it becomes. It just keeps getting harder for me. I obsess over every sentence, every syllable. I live inside of these books. They completely consume me. I Benedict, why do we put ourselves through this?
I don't know. It's too late to do something, like normal, probably. And I think unfortunately, we gave our 10,000 Malcolm Gladwell hours into writing, and now we have to go on with that. I think because there was also a question, and then I have to read one of your parts because we really have to do that too. I think one of our similarities is the way how we use humor to hide, and how we use humor to survive, and how we use humor to outbalance the melancholy and sadness we have inside our stories and ourselves. And I can see a similar balance in all of that, and a similar, sometimes we have a similar sarcastic tone, and but at the same time we have a similar in the writing way of see how the characters see other characters and how the characters are described and whatever. And the funny thing is, now you read a few stories from me before. I only know the similarity because I read you books and I could tell, oh my God, that is actually kind of similar sometimes. And that was I felt very close to you. For example, the same way I felt very close to Cosmic Colors, or the same way I felt close to John Green or whatever. I can see a similar note of observation, and I think we do this because we're afraid to do something normal. That's also the answer. We're afraid to do something normal, properly, or whatever, reasonable. We're escaping the normal life by being writers, and yeah, that's I would have been so lost. And why I right before the thing is, like, after 20 years of writing, I'm on a break. I'm on a sabbatical. I study. I want to see what else is there in order to explore the world, because on my latest book there was a quote by good old Ferris Bueller, who said, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. And you also can miss it by writing, especially by writing, because it means you are creating real worlds with real characters, and you leave our world to go there, and sometimes you come back, and where is everybody? And you're not at the same time. And when you finally have published the book and everybody can see where you have been the last 5 or 6 years, you already have moved on to another world. So you always miss kind of the people. So this is why I want to go on a break, do something else. And it is great. So whenever you are, how old are you guys now? In like 20 or 19 or 21?
Yeah.
Yeah. I always, you don't have to have the pressure to know what you do the rest of your life at that age. You have to maybe have the pressure to know what you do in 1 or 2 years. But even I, or maybe Joey, we were so like we thought we had found it or whatever. Even we can sit there 20 years later not knowing what to do. Why should I know at age 20 what I will feel and how I feel and what I want to do at age 40? My 50-year-old alter ego will also say, yeah, thank you, Mr. 38-year-old, but I have very, very different ideas of life now. Thanks for all the work you've done before, but I do something else. It shouldn't be a pressure to know what to do later in life. And yeah, that's what I want to say. And now I'm going to read Joey's Unfortunately, I can't read the whole short story because I'm not a native English speaker and I'm pretty slow because of that. And so please forgive me if I do even mistakes or whatever. And this story, it's from his book. I know it's going to happen for you someday. It's 10 short stories that build together a novel. They all take place in the same small town called Moberly. And this is, I'm not exaggerating here, this is on the same high level as The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, because the loneliness in small town is probably has never been better described in the last years. It's really touching. And the story I'm gonna read now only, unfortunately, will give you a glimpse because I only can read the first part. It is so heartbreaking. I was finishing, I was rereading it this morning, and I sat there, I almost could go on reading. It was going so deep. And what we can see, at least here in the first part, is how fine it starts to be built up. And unfortunately, we missed the moment when it goes like, but we are here. But maybe you can already see how fine it sets the tone. Okay. 1 sec. Antique girl. On school days, Carly Burkhall arrived at the antique mall at around 3:30. The first thing she always did there was head straight to the back office, where the bathroom was, because her nerves kept her from using the toilet at school. After she peed and washed her hands, she had a ritual in which she pressed her forehead against the bathroom door and quietly said, "You're okay now. You're okay now." The pettiness and judgment that came from the young people was done for the day, and she could now be herself among older people and older things. Some days, this ritual allowed Carly to reset the afternoon. Other days, she could not stop dwelling on some incident that happened at school. A lot of times, it was the whispers. And after she used the bathroom, she sat at the desk in the office and did something she called sorting things out. Sorting things out meant that Carly would take whatever was bothering her and rearrange her feelings in such a way that she would not be as hurt as she originally thought she was. So you see, Carly, they likely didn't mean it that way at all. And once it was sorted out, the incident could be packaged and set aside in order that she might salvage the rest of the day. One afternoon, Carly was having a particularly hard time sorting things out in relation to a comment from Emily Liddell. Emily was the only student in 7th grade who rivaled Carly academically. And on top of that, she was one of the popular girls. Carly didn't know how this was even possible. Normally, it seemed like the smarter you were, the less people liked you. The comment happened because of group work, which her teachers always thought was such a wonderful idea. That day in 6th period, her world civilizations teacher put Carly in a group with Emily and 3 boys. And when Carly offered an answer on their worksheet about Siddhartha Gautama, Emily said with such hatefulness that she might as well have hissed, "You don't have to talk so quietly." Carly's reply was, "I know." That was the best she could do. As she sat at the desk in the back office, Carly could not stop replaying the scene in her mind. The heat that came to her freckled cheeks, the embarrassed look on the boys' faces. Coincidentally, this was the same desk where Carly had witnessed Emily in a rare state of weakness. In front of the desk was a two-way mirror, which Carly's parent had installed to watch the shoplifters. One day last fall, Emily and her mom and their perfect ponytails came bouncing in the antique mall. Carly watched Emily from her side of the mirror, and Emily eventually made her way to the back booth, the one rented by Lucille, who specialized in RS pressure bowls. Carly was astonished when Emily walked right up to the mirror. She rolled back in the swivel chair, thinking someone as smart as Emily would catch on, but she did not see through the glass. Carly sat frozen as she watched Emily adjust her long, straight hair that did not at all need adjusting, then tilt back that face that everyone thought was so pretty in order to check her nostrils. Carly's eyes widened when Emily leaned in to examine her face, which took on an unmistakable expression of sadness as she tried to pop a pimple. In that moment, even though Carly despised the girl, she felt close to her. Carly herself had recently started acne medication that gave her diarrhea. So when Emily said, "You don't have to talk so quietly," the first response that came to Carly's mind was, "I saw you through the mirror." But instead, she said, "I know." At the desk sorting things out, she realized she never wanted Emily to know that she had seen her, because to make it known, to let that out, might come at the expense of a soft feeling she had for people that she was not yet ready to lose. J.C. Penney's was the last of the retail chains in downtown Moberly, outlasting Woolworths and Newberry's, but ultimately closing after the Walmart Supercenter opened on Highway 71. The building that Penney's had occupied on the corner of Main and 2nd Streets was vacant for 4 years, until Carly's mom and dad bought it and opened the Moberly Antique Mall. Carly was 8 at that time. The first night she was in the empty building, she ran all over the sprawling, wide open floors and tried to climb the wide poles that went up to the incredibly high ceiling, all the while nearly slobbering with giddiness, hardly able to believe this humongous old store now belonged to her family. Now her parents were divorced, and she was 12 with skinny legs that she worried were abnormally long. Sometimes she feared her whole body had been together incorrectly. And there was no room left to run because the mall was covered in booths rented out by mostly elderly women. The booths were neatly organized since Carly's mom made it clear she did not want her store to appear chunky and cluttered like so many antique places around here. With display cases full of costume jewelry, shelves with rows of iridescent carnival glass, and china cabinets holding shimmering Waterford crystal, the result was a dazzling expanse of fanciness seldom seen in Moberly. Carly couldn't wait to get there on school days so she could feel free again. The only time she talked at school was when the teacher called on her. Every once in a while, she tried to say something only to be interrupted. And as a result, she was only able to get out a single syllable that to the other students must have sounded like a strange, blurted animal noise. The dealers, though, were shocked when they learned that Carly was such a quiet student. She certainly had no trouble talking to them. Even when she was 8, they would say, "It's just like talking to a little adult." She could easily make the dealers laugh, and there was an ongoing bit they enjoyed in which she imitated the antique mall customers, saying in a hick voice, "Will you take less for this?" By age 10, Carly's preference for the company of older people reached the point that her mom had to take it upon herself to invite children to the house so Carly would be around people her own age. These children, including Shannon, her best friend since 3rd grade, didn't have much to say when Carly would show them her jewelry and antique collections. She didn't compliment the sterling earrings that Trudy, the diabetic widow, had given her, or the love story china given to her by Mark and Rob, the first gay couple she'd ever known. But what really irritated Carly, this was at age 11, was the lack of any sort of reaction when her young visitors saw the "Rebel Without a Cause" poster hanging above the powder pink bed. Carly's parents were older than all the other kids' parents, and they had always taught her to appreciate the way movies used to be. The dealers were amazed at how much she knew about everyone from Carole Lombard to Montgomery Clift to Kentucky's own Patricia Neal. Her favorite, of course, was James Dean. She wasn't sure, but she thought she might be something similar to in love with him. Her feelings for him were not only because of the things he was, sad-eyed, intense, and worrisome in such a way that somehow made worrying look beautiful, but also the things he wasn't. Even though he was from Indiana, the state just across the Ohio River from Kentucky, he wasn't at all like so many of the men and boys around here. He was not rough. He was not crude. He was not hard. He likely did not spit on the pavement when he came out of a store. Why did the man around here always do that? And his eyes likely did not automatically go to women's behinds. Carly could sometimes be found in the back office reading a James Dean biography that her mom had bought her from Mr. Matthews' book booth. The biography said that after his death, some of his fans believed that he actually had not died, that the car crash had mutilated him so that his handlers hid him away in an institution in order to preserve his legacy, and because his disfigured state had caused him to go insane. Carly had never told anyone, not even her beloved Mr. Bainham, but she liked to believe this theory was true, and that with advances in cosmetic surgery and psychiatry, James Dean would one day return as a dashing older gentleman in order to save the world from its own trashiness. The day she had been reminded that she didn't have to talk so quietly, Carly stared out the two-way mirror and watched the people. There was a time, and not that long ago, when instead of the back office, Carly liked to sit in the front window that faced Main Street, where she would watch the cars go by and wave at the people on the sidewalk. Nowadays, she avoided the front window. She felt like people were watching her all day at school, waiting for her to embarrass herself. Why would a person want to be seen any more than she had to? She watched as her mom, a prim woman with a warm southern drawl, was showing jewelry to Mrs. Winokur, a frequent patron who liked talking about how a minister had molested her and how her mother wouldn't believe her. One of the dealers, a retired grade school teacher named Dottie, was at the counter. Carly's dad was not there, nor was he ever there anymore, because he was in Louisville. 3 years after he left, her father's absence still made even the sunniest of days seem overcast, the bluest of skies seem gray. She only saw him every other weekend. Her older brother, Luke, wasn't at the mall either, because all he cared about now was his band, but she couldn't blame him for wanting to bury himself in something. Carly was giving herself a headache, still trying to sort things out, when she saw Mr. Bainham come in. He was wearing his usual outfit, dark slacks perfectly creased, white dress shirt with an ascot, herringbone patterned sports coat, and a newsboy cap over snow-white hair. He was slender, had an intelligent nose, and possessed the walk and posture of someone far younger than his 75 years. He had first come to the antique mall last summer, wanting to rent a booth to sell his glassware collection, Fostoria, Fenton, coin glass. Like all the other dealers, he agreed to pay Mrs. Burkhall $1 per square foot each month, which came to $100. Carly's mom recalled having read a write-up in the Register years ago about his work and the movies. And when she told Carly about his new dealer, her life became instantly less dull. "You mean he's from Moberly?" "Born and raised," said her mom. "How could that be?" Her mom laughed. "This town can surprise you." Mr. Bainham was something of a curiosity to the people of Moberly. Besides the ascot and newsboy cap, they considered some of his habits strange. He rented the first floor of a turn of the Century home on Elm Street downtown, where almost every night he could be seen through the window eating alone by candlelight. Also, every evening he walked to Chuck's Tavern on First Street, where he had one drink. He apparently did not own a car. Every Sunday, a young man in a black Cadillac could be seen picking him up and returning him a few hours later. Everyone knew him as a gentleman, the consummate gentleman, in fact. He was able to pull a compliment out as easily as the handkerchiefs he pulled from his front pocket, and if he saw you and you happened to mention you had a bit of a sinus infection, as people so often did in these parts, and then maybe you didn't see him again for a month or two, he would still say something like, "I hope you overcame that sinus infection by now." And you would say yes, and he would seem genuinely pleased that you were well again. When they met, Carly could not get her questions out fast enough. and in his soft-spoken manner, he seemed to enjoy the company of someone so interested in his former life. She learned how he got out of Moberly. He studied illustration and design at the University of Kentucky. He became an instructor in stage and costume design in New York City, then Paris. In Paris, his poster designs for theater productions caught the eye of Ethel Barrymore. His Barrymore connection eventually opened doors for him in Hollywood, where he became a color consultant for Warner Bros., working on films starring Doris Day, Jimmy Stewart, Henry Fonda, and Spencer Tracy, among others. Most interesting to Carly, though, was that he had worked on East of Eden, James Dean's first film. Mr. Bainham said that Dean had been a polite young man and had an innocence about him because everything was so new to him. He called him childlike and said a lot of the time he seemed withdrawn. "Oh, I knew it," said Carly. "I just knew it." That troubling afternoon, she was relieved to see him walk in because sometimes when she couldn't sort things out on her own, it helped to talk to someone. When Carly came out of the office, before she could go greet Mr. Bainham, she had to stop and check the tassels on an oriental rug to make sure they were all straight. This was something she always had to do. Seeing a few were out of place, she kneeled and straightened them. Then she headed to Mr. Bainham's booth toward the front, where he was setting out some depression wear. "There's my Carly girl. Oh, look at you. You just look, darling." She was wearing a long plaid blazer with a vintage brooch over a turtleneck along with black leggings. Because of her unusual fashion sense, and because of her big curly brown hair, which she sometimes lost control as the day wore on, and because of the tiny gap between her two front teeth, not to mention her surplus of freckles, she often felt like the other kids were whispering about her. She could never be certain, but she was pretty sure. But she could always count on a compliment from Mr. Bainham. "Thank you. How are you today?" "I'm fine, dear." He folded his arms and looked at her sideways. "Did someone give you trouble today?" "How could you tell?" "Your eyes." "Yeah, one of them upset me. It's not a big deal, but..." She didn't know where she was going with that sentence. This happened to her often. "How about we go for a walk?" said Mr. Bainham. They went up one flight of stairs to the balcony, which mostly had crafts and quilts. As they paced across the length of the balcony, she told him about Emily's comment. "But what really bothers me is that I know she's right. I do talk too quietly." "I think your voice is the perfect volume." "But that's with you. At school, I hardly talk at all. And when I do talk, it's not loud enough. And they think I'm weird, and I am weird, but I don't know how to act any other way. And it's just like I walk around that school inside my own little prison. Mr. Bainham, what am I going to do? I have 5 more years of this." "You'll make it. I have faith in you. But it does pain me to hear you placing all the blame on yourself. You do not deserve to be spoken to the way that girl spoke to you. But I know how I must sound to them." Mr. Bainham pursed his lips and gave her a mock-angry look. He led her over to the railing of the balcony, and they looked out over the spread of elegance below. "Let me ask you this. Why do you think you're so quiet?" "I don't know. When I do talk at school, it makes me nervous. So I guess nervousness is..." Mr. Bainham closed his eyes and nodded, as if to say she gave the correct answer. "There you have it." "What?" "That's the problem. But it's their problem, not yours. There's Emily and the others. Don't you see? Some people don't have enough sense to be nervous." Carly smiled for the first time that afternoon. "I like that. Some people don't have enough sense to be nervous." Mr. Bainham told her that the world needed more people like her, people who thought without talking rather than talked without thinking. He went on to explain that her nervousness was a virtue, because the world was loud and unpredictable, and the natural response from an intelligent person should be reticence, which he renamed shyness when Carly asked for a definition. He said he had been the same way in school, that with his nervousness came sensitivity, and it was this sensitivity that allowed him to become an artist. In short, she would be okay someday. She would find that the world was big enough that it did contain enough places even for the shy and for the nervous. Now, he said, shall we go down to the office and play? He was referring to checkers, which they usually played each time he came to the antique mall. She kept the board in the bottom desk drawer. Oh, can't we just keep on? Can't we just keep talking? The boy who would eventually find a way to ruin everything was named Dustin Boucher. And here I stop. Unfortunately, because from this was like the exposition, and from now on, the whole thing goes up or more precise directly into your heart. And yeah, it's hard to, this is like a short excerpt, and it's hard to say why I chose this in order to talk about Joey's complete writing, because when you read the whole book, I know it's going to happen to you someday. In German, it's called Irgendwann wird es gut. It's a masterpiece because all the little pieces of the puzzle together give a picture that is incredible. What we don't see here is, for example, Joe's wittiness and his sharp humor. We don't see like the real touching moment. But what we can see here is like the way, like I said, how he described characters, how it is so well observed. And he's so aware of what he's doing. He knows where to put the pieces, and from now on, he set them together into another picture. And he's so considerate as a writer, and he's so down to the characters' feelings. And yeah, it's hard to just by one excerpt talk about everything. But what I really love on Joey is that he's like for me, he's a complete writer. He knows how to touch you deeply, and he knows to entertain you, and he knows to bring in intelligent thought about life and a philosophical reflection. And he also knows to be funny. And I so enjoy his books, and yeah, I'm really looking forward. And what we don't know so far is that he's also a musician, and he even had a band called Nervous People, which makes perfectly sense when you heard that. And he also wrote a musical full of indie hits. It's really crazy. Yeah, so he's just a very, very fine, talented man that definitely deserves an applause for his beautiful work.
I think the world of you, Benedict.
No, because when the thing is, like, what I also like in your writing is that you can see that you care, you know, one can see that you care. And it's about, like, all the good writing for me is about mistakes we do in life and everything. But what I love in writing is that you always have a second thought, and you always can come back, and people are not perfect, but you deal with that, and you care for people, and you are somebody that is not going on, and whatever, you go back, you look at it, you reflect, and this caring for people and emotions is mirrored by your character, Joey. Whenever, for example, the last time I saw Joey in real life, like 3 years ago, it was a troubled time for me because a beloved person was dying, and I accidentally was at the same time in Kentucky at Joey's. And Joey is somebody that cares, and it is there for you. And this is what you will find in the stories too. And that you also are smart and witty is like a bonus, and altogether completes your work. But it's this caring heart that is also the heart of your stories.
All right. Considering the little amount of time we have left, I'd say we have one more short question that we can squeeze in, and one more short answer. So whoever has a question right now, raise your hand. All right.
Yeah, I've got the perfect question for a short answer. Ideally to you both, but I'm picking up on something that you, Benedict, said. That is, you said how we use humor to hide and how we use humor to survive. ... You didn't complete the sentences there. And I was wondering, does humor in itself also has the ability to heal? Because most of the stories I think that you tell, the healing comes from melancholy or forgiveness, as in the story now. But does humor also has the power to heal, or is it only to hide, to survive, and a bit more superficial?
Thank you for that question. I hope it's okay, Joey, if I step in, because you're right. I missed one point, and there's this quote by Viktor Frankl, who said, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms." to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And there were always choices to make. And the thing is, like, we can tell our stories like as a tragic story or as a humorous one. And obviously there are moments, bleak moments in grief, bleak moments in life where you can't, hey, I have another joke or whatever. But there's a moment, I strongly believe, in the very center of things, looking into death's eyes, where humor can be your ally and where humor is an answer to all these things and also part of a healing. And I will never, to bring something personal in, sitting on the when my mom died, sitting there with my sister, we were sad, we were crying, but there was one moment we made a joke and we had to laugh so heavily, you know. And this was sharing this moment with my sister was one of the most precious memories in my life, and it was also part of the healing. And I think that's what I love in writing, is that we can go back and bring in the humor and finding the words we probably didn't have in the situations in the first place. And I think humor is part of this attitude we can have towards things. And I think humor always needs a second layer. So you need to go a bit away from yourself and what happens. And on the second layer, you can see yourself as a tragic character, also as a funny character. You have doubts about yourself. This is where all these dictatorships and all this shit that happens in the world, these people don't have humor. They only can see themselves like as a one-dimensional thing, and there's only this one opinion, whatever. But doubts also can lead to humor. Being insecure about yourself can lead to humor. And so humor is an answer and is part of the healing. And if we all could consider ourselves being also a bit with a bit more irony and whatever, and also humor, and I think this is it's a human approach. What do you think, Joe?
If we could not laugh, we would go insane.
Too bad.
I saw
Got a
that
long
written
story
on
short.
a truck some. That time. Okay. Listen, Benedict, it was so great to see you. Okay.
Same.
Thank you for continuing to champion my work. Thank you for this love fest that probably has left our audience a bit nauseated, but it's sincere, you all. And thank you for joining us, and to the audience here. This has certainly been good for my ego. So thanks so much for having me, and it's been an honor.
I only can give that back, and I also want to say thank you for everybody that was watching, listening. Thank you for inviting us. It is really an honor. It's definitely something I'm gonna brag a bit. I don't know, you know, I had this Harvard talk, whatever. And, no, it was a pleasure, and it's sad. I think we had there were also some questions about what we do now and whatever. It's sad we had to stop here, but thanks for at least for going this way with us. And yeah, hope you yeah, all the best to everyone who's listening, and all the best to you, Joey. We will have a Skype any day.
Thank you.
Thank you also very much from our side as the organizing team. So it's so great having you here. I think everybody really enjoyed it. And also thank you to the audience who joined us today at the Harvard Kennedy School and also online. And I think this was a really nice end to this whole thing. I don't know, if you enjoyed it so much, maybe you can answer a lot more questions together in some kind of other format. I think everybody would really love it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much, y'all. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.